I have everything I need. Let me write the story now. I have built 41 houses in my life, not metaphorically. Actual houses with foundations and load-bearing walls and roof trusses I calculated by hand before software did it for you. I started as a framing carpenter at 22, worked my way into general contracting by 30, and by the time I retired at 66, I had built or renovated homes in 7 states. I know exactly what holds a structure up. I know exactly what brings one down. I did not expect at 68 years old to be applying that knowledge to my own family. My name is Ed Calloway. I am 68 years old. I live in a house I built myself in Clarksville, Tennessee, on a half-acre lot I bought in 1994 for less than the cost of a used pickup truck. The house has 4 bedrooms, a wraparound porch, and a kitchen I gutted and rebuilt from the studs after my wife Lorraine told me the old one was too small. That was 2003. Lorraine passed in 2019. The kitchen is exactly as we left it. My son is 51. I will call him my son, because that is what he is, and because I was raised in a generation where you do not air a man's name in public when you are about to say something unflattering about him. My daughter-in-law is 47. My daughter is 44. She lives in Nashville, 45 minutes away on a good day. My son lives in Louisville, 2.5 hours north. In February of last year, I was diagnosed with a blockage. Specifically, a significant blockage in the left anterior descending artery, which my cardiologist, Dr. Thierry Simone Ware, described as serious enough to require bypass surgery. She said it with the calm of someone who has delivered this news 1,000 times, which I imagine she has. She's a precise woman. I respect precision. She told me the surgery would take 4 to 6 hours, the recovery would be 6 to 8 weeks, and I would need someone in the house for at least the first 2 weeks post-discharge. I heard everything she said. I made notes on a legal pad the way I have made notes my entire career. I asked 3 follow-up questions. I thanked her. I drove home on I-24 and sat in the kitchen Lorraine had loved and thought about who I was going to call. I told both of my children the same week. I gave them 6 weeks' notice, the surgery date, the hospital name, the name of my surgeon. I sent it in a text and followed it with a phone call to each of them because I am 68 years old and I still believe a phone call means something. My son said, "Dad, we're absolutely there. Don't even think about it." I could hear the television in the background, a game of some kind. He said it the way people say, of course, when they mean I hear you. But I'm not fully present for this conversation. I told myself I was being uncharitable. He is a busy man. He manages a team of 20 at a logistics company. He has 2 kids in high school. I understand busy. My daughter called me back the same night. She was in the car, kids in the back, and she said, "Daddy, I will be there, I promise." She used the word promise. I remember because she said it clearly and without hesitation, the way you say something you mean. She asked if I needed anything before the surgery. She said she would bring me food on Sunday. She did not bring food on Sunday, but she called to tell me why she couldn't, which is something, I suppose. The surgery was on a Tuesday in March. I woke at 5 in the morning, made coffee. I was not supposed to drink, force of habit, sat on the porch in the dark. It was cold, that particular Tennessee cold in March, where the air smells like it's trying to decide between winter and spring, and hasn't made up its mind yet. I sat in the same rocking chair I have sat in for 20 years. Lorraine's chair was next to mine, the one with the faded blue cushion she never got around to replacing. I sat there and I thought about what it means to go under general anesthesia at 68 years old, with a blockage in your heart. I thought about the bypass and what could go wrong, and what I had and had not said to the people I loved. I thought about the last time I talked to my daughter. She had texted a heart emoji the Friday before. I thought about my son, who had not called since I told him the surgery date. I drove myself to the hospital at 6:30 because I had arranged a friend from the neighborhood, Vic, to follow me in his truck and drive my car back home. Vic is 72 and recently widowed and keeps odd hours. He said he was glad for something to do at 6 in the morning. I checked myself in. A nurse whose name tag said, "Carla took my belongings and handed me a folded gown. She told me they would call my emergency contact when I was out of surgery. I had listed my son. I was in the hospital for 11 days. That is not a complaint, that is a fact. Bypass recovery requires monitoring. There are complications that can emerge in the first week. Dr. Ware kept me longer than average because my blood pressure was running higher than she wanted it, and because I live alone, and because she is a thorough woman who does not discharge patients before she is satisfied. I was grateful for that. I was less grateful for the view from room 218, which was a parking structure, gray and flat and completely indifferent to whatever was happening in my chest. My son called on day 1 when I was still coming out of anesthesia and could barely hold the phone. He called again on day 4. Day 4, he asked how I was feeling, and then, after a pause I have since memorized, asked whether I had looked into refinancing recently. Interest rates were moving, he said. Just something to think about, Dad. No rush. I told him I was 4 days out of open heart surgery. He said, right, of course. Get your rest. My daughter called every day from day 1 through day 5. Short calls. Warm calls, I will give her that. She asked how I was eating, whether the nurses were good, whether I needed her to call anyone for me. On day 5, she says she was definitely coming on day 7. On day 7, she texted Dad, something came up with the kids. I'm so sorry. I'll come this weekend for sure. She did not come that weekend. She texted again on day 9. Daddy, I feel terrible. Next week, I promise. I read that text in bed at 10 in the evening with a monitor clipped to my finger and a blood pressure cuff that inflated automatically every 4 hours. I set the phone down on the hospital tray table. I looked at the chair beside my bed. It was a standard hospital chair. The stackable kind, upholstered in that particular shade of dusty mauve that hospital furniture always seems to come in. It had been empty since I arrived. I thought about something Lorraine used to say. She used to say that you find out who people are not when things are good, but when things are inconvenient. She said it about contractors who walked off jobs. She said it about neighbors who disappeared when the work needed doing. She did not live long enough to say it about our children, and I am glad for that, because it would have broken something in her that I do not think would have healed. My daughter-in-law sent a flower arrangement on day 3. It was a nice arrangement. It sat on the windowsill and looked out at the parking structure with what I can only describe as appropriate resignation. I appreciated the gesture. A gesture is not a presence, but it is not nothing. On day 8, a patient care technician named Jerome came in to check my chart and found me awake at 2 in the morning reading a paperback I had brought from home. He looked at the empty chair the way people look at things they are trying not to remark on, and asked if I was expecting anyone. I said not at this hour. He nodded. He said he would check back in an hour. He did check back. He brought me a cup of decaf that I did not ask for, set it on the tray table without commentary, and went back to his rounds. I have thought about that cup of decaf more than I have thought about most things that happened that month. On day 11, Dr. Ware discharged me. She reviewed my medications, gave me a printed instruction sheet, and shook my hand with both of hers. A hospital volunteer named Patty wheeled me to the entrance in a wheelchair, hospital policy, which I found both unnecessary and oddly touching. I called a rideshare from the curb. The driver, a man named Desmond, asked how I was doing. I said I'd been better. He laughed a little and said, fair enough. We drove the 30 minutes back to Clarksville, mostly in silence, which suited me. He helped me get my bag to the door. I thanked him. He said, you take care now, sir, and meant it in the way that strangers sometimes mean things more than people who have known you your whole life. I stood at my own front door for a moment before I went in. I'm not sure why. My sternum was still healing. I was moving carefully the way you move when your body has recently been opened and closed and is still negotiating what that means. But I stood there for a moment. Hand on the door, I hung myself, and I thought about the 6 weeks I had given them. 42 days. And then I went inside. The house was exactly as I had left it. That sounds simple. It is not simple. When you have been gone 11 days following open heart surgery and you come home and the house is exactly as you left it, it means no one came. Not to check the mail. Not to water the 2 plants on the kitchen sill that Lorraine started from seed in 2018 and that I have kept alive since she passed, because throwing them out was not something I was prepared to do. Not to simply be present in the house where I had lived my life. The mail was stacked up in the box by the door, 11 days of it. One of the plants was dry enough that 2 leaves had gone yellow. I watered it first, before I did anything else. Then I sat in the kitchen and drank a glass of water, and looked out the window of the backyard, at the oak tree and the raised beds I built along the back fence, and the workshop where I still spend 3 mornings a week, whether I have a project or not. Because a man who spent 41 years building things does not simply stop needing to build things. I thought about room 218, the parking structure. The dusty mauve chair. Jerome and the cup of decaf. The flower arrangement, looking out at nothing. I thought about Lorraine and what she would have said. And I was glad she was not here to see it, and sorry she was not here, full stop. The way I am sorry every single day in ways I have gotten better at not showing. I am a contractor. I do not react to structural failures. I assess them. I document them. I determine the appropriate remediation and I implement it without drama. Because drama does not fix load-bearing problems. It just makes noise while the building continues to fail. I finished the glass of water. I picked up the phone. I called my attorney, a man named Gregory Polk, who has handled my affairs for 19 years and who listened without interrupting while I told him what I needed. When I finished, he said, "Ed, are you sure?" I told him I had been sure since day 7. He said he would get started on the documents. I thanked him and hung up and looked out at the oak tree for a while, and then I went to bed. 8 weeks after discharge, when Dr. Pierre Ware had cleared me for normal activity and my sternum had healed, and I was walking 2 miles every morning along the river path 2 blocks from the house, I called both of my children and invited them to Sunday dinner. I made pot roast, which is what I make when I want a house to smell like something worth coming home to. I made cornbread from scratch, Lorraine's recipe, which I only do on occasions that feel like they require it. My son arrived first. He always arrives first. It is one of his things, arriving first, as though punctuality were a form of affection. He came through the door with a bottle of bourbon, the good kind, and hugged me longer than he usually does. He looked good. He looked relieved. He walked through the living room the way people walk through rooms when they are taking inventory and trying not to look like they are taking inventory. He looked at the fireplace, the built-in shelves I put in myself in 2001, the hardwood floors I refinished the year after Lorraine passed because I needed something to do with my hands. He said, "Place looks great, Dad." I said, "It's the same as it's always been." He said, "Right, right." He laughed a little. He set the bourbon on the counter and asked if I needed any help with dinner. My daughter arrived 12 minutes later with a store-bought cake and a hug that lasted long enough for me to understand she had been carrying something. She sat at the kitchen table and, with the careful precision of someone who has been rehearsing, she began to explain. I listened the way I listen to clients who are telling me why the project is behind schedule. Which is to say, I listened completely, absorbed everything, and drew my own conclusions without sharing them. There was a thing with her husband's work schedule, a thing with one of the kids at school, nothing serious but a required attention. A thing with her own workload that week that I did not fully follow but nodded through. She said, "I felt so guilty, Daddy, twice. And I have noticed over the years that people who feel guilty about a thing usually find ways to not do the thing rather than simply doing it." I told her I understood. She exhaled. I passed the cornbread. We had dinner. It was a good dinner, actually. My son made us all laugh with a story about one of his employees that I will not repeat here but was genuinely funny. My daughter talked about the kids, her garden, a home renovation she and her husband were considering. I asked good questions. I was warm. I was completely, genuinely warm, because I love my children and warmth is not something I perform. It is something I have. Then I set down my fork. I said I had been doing some thinking since the surgery. About getting things in order. At my age, with my medical history, it made sense to make sure everything was properly documented. I'd been working with Gregory on some updates. The table shifted, not dramatically, but I am a contractor. I notice when load distribution changes. My son said very carefully that sounded very sensible. My daughter said, "Of course, that's so smart, Daddy." I picked up my fork and said, "More pot roast?" And that was the end of that conversation. What followed over the next several months have the quality of something engineered rather than something that happened. My son began calling every Sunday. Not Sunday-ish. Sunday 10 a.m. Central. Reliable as a plumb line. He asked about my health, my eating, my fall appointments with Dr. Ware. He asked about the house. Gently at first, then with slightly more structure. Had I given any thought to whether the place was getting too big to manage? Had I looked at what similar properties on my street were listing for? Just curious, Dad. Just thinking about the future. My daughter started coming on Wednesdays. She brought groceries, the right groceries, my brand of coffee, the specific whole grain bread, Things she had clearly paid attention to at some point in the past and stored away for exactly this use. She sat with me in the kitchen, and we talked about the grandkids in her garden and what was happening in the neighborhood. She was good company. She's always been good company when she comes. I sat across from her on those Wednesday afternoons and felt something I had not expected to feel, which was grief. Not anger. Grief. For the version of her who might have been there. The one with the groceries and the real attention and the hour to spare. She was right there across the kitchen table. She had been right there all along. I drank my coffee. I did not say any of this. I asked about her daughter's soccer team. My son's wife sent a casserole dish with a note saying she hoped I was eating well, which I was. I thanked her by text with complete sincerity because she was not the one I was accounting for. 3 months after surgery, I was sitting on the porch on a Sunday morning with my second cup of coffee when my daughter called. Not Wednesday. Sunday. She asked without preamble whether I wanted to come to dinner at her place on Saturday. Just us, she said. She said she'd been thinking about things. She said, and this landed differently than anything else had landed, she said, "Dad, I feel like I don't actually know that much about what your work was like. Is that a weird thing to say?" I sat very still for a moment. It was not a weird thing to say. It was the most honest thing she had said to me since the surgery. It was also, I noted with the clear-eyed practicality of a man who had already filed his paperwork, approximately 4 months too late for it to change the paperwork. But she was my daughter, and the dogwood at the end of the driveway was blooming. And I am 68, not dead. It's not weird, I told her. I'd like that. We had dinner the following Saturday at her house in Nashville. Her husband was traveling. The kids ate with us for the first part and then disappeared upstairs the way teenagers do, which was fine. She made pasta and a salad and apologized that it wasn't fancier. I told her I had eaten 30 years of job site lunches out of a cooler, and pasta was luxury by comparison. She laughed. It was a real laugh. We talked for 2 hours after dinner. She asked about the work, what I actually built, what I was proudest of. I told her about the custom home I framed in Asheville in 1998, 4,000 square feet on a sloped lot that everyone said couldn't be built the way the clients wanted it built. And I built it anyway, and it is still standing, and I drove past it once. About 5 years ago, just to check, I told her about a commercial renovation in Memphis that went badly sideways when the existing structure turned out to have been modified without permits, and half of what we expected to be solid turned out to be improvised, and how we had to redesign on the fly with the client standing in the middle of it insisting on the original timeline. She listened. She asked follow-up questions. Real ones. She said, "I didn't know any of that." I said, "You didn't ask." I said it gently, without any heat behind it. Simply as a fact. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I'm sorry I wasn't there, Dad. At the hospital. I know I kept saying I would come and I didn't, and I'm sorry." I looked at her across the dinner table. My daughter, 44 years old, with her mother's eyes and a strand of gray at her temple that she keeps meaning to address and never does. And I felt the full weight of what it is to be a parent, which is to love someone through their failures the same way you love them through everything else. The love does not negotiate. It simply continues. I said I know. I did not say it's okay because it was not okay. I did not say don't worry about it because she should worry about it. At least a little, at least enough to remember it. I did not tell her that Gregory Polk had a file with her name on it and that the file was not what she was hoping it was. I said I know, and I meant it completely, and we cleared the table and talked for another half hour about nothing in particular, and it was good. It is spring now. I am sitting on the porch on a Tuesday morning with coffee, and the kind of quiet you only get on a weekday, when the neighborhood is emptied out and the birds are the loudest thing for half a block. The dogwood is past peak but still holding on. There is a project in my workshop I've been picking at for 2 weeks. A blanket chest in white oak. Nothing complicated, just something to do with my hands. I walk 3 miles every morning now, up along the river path and back. Dr. Ware is pleased. She uses the word excellent a lot, which from a cardiologist is high praise. My blood pressure is where she wants it. My heart, she says, is doing exactly what it should. I think about room 218 sometimes, the parking structure. Jerome in the cup of decaf. Patty in the wheelchair. Desmond who said, "Take care now, sir," and meant it. There are people who show up for strangers, that some people will not show up for their own blood, and I have made a decision not to carry bitterness about that. Because bitterness is weight, and I am 68 years old with a repaired heart, and I am not adding weight I don't need. I made 2 donations last month. The first was to the cardiac care unit at Tenova Healthcare in Clarksville, a fund specifically for patient comfort and overnight amenities, the kind of fund that puts better chairs in rooms where people wait alone. I made it without announcing it to anyone. I do not require acknowledgement for the things I do. I never have. The second donation was to a workforce development program in Nashville that trains young people for skilled trades, because I have watched the construction industry struggle to find qualified framers and finish carpenters for 20 years. And it is a problem that will outlast me if nobody does something about it. Gregory Polk has a file. It has been updated twice since October. It is organized the way I organize everything, clearly labeled, sequentially documented, nothing ambiguous. Gregory is a careful man, and he will handle everything exactly as specified when the time comes. There are 4 named beneficiaries in that file. One is a veterans housing nonprofit based in Nashville that builds and renovates homes for veterans transitioning out of service, because I know what a house means and I know what it means to build one, and I know what it means to not have one. One is a workforce development program I just mentioned, because the trades deserve the same investment we give to every other skilled profession. One is a children's medical fund at Vanderbilt, because children did not choose to be in hospital beds, and some will not to make those rooms a little less hard. The fourth is a small animal shelter in Clarksville that Lorraine volunteered at for 11 years, because she loved it and it was hers, and it is still there, and it still needs funding. My son and my daughter are not in that file. Not in the way they believe they are. The house on this lot I bought in 1994 will be liquidated and the proceeds distributed to those 4 organizations. Gregory knows the details. He has known since November. He is the kind of attorney who does not require explanation, only instruction. And I gave him clear instruction. There is a letter in the file, 1 page, written by hand in my drafting print. The small tight lettering of a man who spent 40 years making sure his measurements were legible to other people. It is addressed to both of them. It says this: by the time you read this, there will be questions. I want to answer the most important one, because I believe in giving people accurate information, and I always have. I was in the hospital for 11 days following open heart surgery. The surgery was March 11th. I was discharged March 22nd. I came home in a rideshare I ordered from the hospital entrance. I told you the date 6 weeks before it happened. I am not writing this with anger. I want to be clear about that. Anger would have been easier, honestly. This is something else. This is clarity. I built things my whole life. I built them to last, with the right materials and the right methods. And I paid attention to the details, because details are where structures fail. I tried to build our family the same way. I don't know where I went wrong. Maybe I didn't go wrong. Maybe some things fail for reasons that aren't about the builder. The donations will do good work. I believe that. I hope you will too eventually. The house was built well. I kept it up carefully. I hope whoever benefits from it finds it sound. I love you. That is not complicated. That is just true. Ed. My son calls on Sundays, 10 a.m., reliable as always. He asks about my health. He asks, eventually, some version of a question about the property, always framed carefully, always reasonable sounding. Last week, he mentioned that a house 2 blocks over had listed at considerably more than he expected. Interesting market, he said. Just something he noticed. I said, and looked out the window at the oak tree in the backyard, which is approximately 60 years old, and was here before I was and will very likely be here after. I said, I know you're thinking about things. I appreciate that. He said, we just want to make sure you're taken care of, Dad, whatever you need. I know, I told him. I know you do. My daughter comes on Wednesdays. She brought me a book last week, a history of American architecture that she said she found at an estate sale and thought I might like. I have already read it, but I did not tell her that. I started it again from the beginning. She sat with me for an hour while I told her about the Falling Water project, which is in the book, and she listened with what appeared to be genuine interest. Maybe it was. People surprise you. She has surprised me these last several months, in the human ways, the real ways. The paperwork just doesn't know about the surprises. It is a Tuesday morning in May. The porch is comfortable. The coffee is right. The coffee is right. The blanket chest in the workshop is about 3 sessions from finished. My hip, the one that has been giving me trouble since 2021, is better than it was last month, which my physician thinks is the result of the walking. I think it is the result of having something to look forward to every morning, but the walking probably helps. I am 68 years old. I had open heart surgery. I came home in a rideshare. I changed my will. I have had pot roast with my children several times since, and they are, in the ways still available to them, my children. There is a cardinal that lands on the porch railing some mornings. Not every morning, just some. He stays for a while, looks around with that bright, indifferent attention birds have, and then he goes. I have stopped trying to predict when he will show up. That is not something you can engineer. You just note it when it happens. I finish my coffee. I rinse the cup. I walk to the workshop, unlock the door, put on the apron I have worn for 30 years. I pick up where I left off. A sound structure does not announce itself. It simply stands. Year after year, through everything the weather and the world can put on it, it stands because of decisions made before anyone was watching, because of materials chosen carefully, because of work done right the first time. The blanket chest will be done by the end of the month. I do not know yet who I will give it to. I will figure that out when I get there. Gregory has the file. Everything is where it needs to be. The rest of it, the coffee and the cardinal and the oak tree and the Wednesday afternoons, that is what I have to give now. And I give it freely. Because it is mine to give, and I am still here to give it. Everything is exactly as it should be. I have been thinking about cause and effect my whole working life. In construction, there is no such thing as an unexplained failure. Something gave because something was wrong before it gave, and if you go back far enough, you find the decision that caused it. A shortcut on the foundation, a material that wasn't rated for the load. Someone who signed off on something they should have questioned. The collapse is never the beginning of the story. It is just the part everyone sees. I think about that when I think about my son and my daughter. I do not think they are bad people. I want to be clear about that because I think it is important to be accurate and not dramatic. They are not villains. They are people who made a series of small decisions, each one reasonable sounding on its own. And those decisions accumulated into something that became visible when the pressure was high enough. That is how most structural failures work. Not one catastrophic choice, 100 small ones that nobody caught. What I have learned at 68 is that integrity is not what you do when it is easy. Integrity is what you do when it is inconvenient, when there is a scheduling conflict, when the drive is 2.5 hours, when you have a work thing and a kid thing and a plumbing thing that may or may not be real. That is exactly when integrity shows up or doesn't. And the record of whether it showed up or not does not erase itself just because time passes. Jerome showed me that, a man I did not know on a hospital floor at 2 a.m, who brought me a cup of decaf I did not ask for and came back an hour later to check. He owed me nothing. He had other patients. He came back anyway. That is not a small thing. That is actually the whole thing in miniature. What I try to carry forward from all of this is not bitterness, because bitterness is a bad material. It looks solid, but it does not bear load. What I try to carry forward is clarity, about what I value, about what I will and will not accept as a substitute for the real thing, about the difference between someone who performs care when there is something at stake for them, and someone who simply shows up because showing up is what you do. My daughter sat across from me at her kitchen table and said she was sorry she wasn't there. And I believe she meant it. That matters to me, actually. Not enough to undo the 11 days, but it matters. Because there is something to be said for a person who can look at what they did and name it clearly without flinching. That is the beginning of something better. Whether she builds on it is her work to do, not mine. My son asks about the property value every Sunday at 10 a.m., and I answer him warmly every time because I am his father and warmth is not conditional. But I also understand exactly what I'm looking at, and I have arranged things accordingly. The paperwork is done. The decisions are made. What remains is this: the coffee, the porch, the oak tree, the blanket chest, and the workshop. 3 sessions from finished. The life that continued whether anyone showed up for it or not. And that is still, on a Tuesday morning in May, genuinely worth showing up for. That is what I know. That is what 11 days in room 218 taught me, and Jerome, and Desmond, and a cup of decaf at 2 in the morning. You find out what a structure is made of when you put it under load, and then you build accordingly.